Donc, il me fait grand plaisir de vous introduire Dr. Jennie Young, directrice exécutive de la Stratégie canadienne de recherche sur le cerveau. Mme Young est titulaire d'un doctorat en neurosciences de l'Université de l'Alberta au Canada. Elle a ensuite passé 14 ans au Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, comme chef de cabinet scientifique du prix Nobel Susumu Tonegawa et du directeur de l'Institut Picower, Li-Huei Tsai. Ses travaux ont porté sur les domaines de l'apprentissage, de la mémoire et de la maladie d'Alzheimer et ont donné lieu à des publications dans des revues à comité de lecture de premier plan telles que Nature, Science, Cell, Nature Neuroscience, Nature Biomedical Engineering et Neuron. Dr. Young a rejoint the Canadian Brain Research Strategy en mars 2021. En tant que directrice exécutive, elle dirige un effort pan-canadien visant à élaborer une stratégie nationale de recherche sur le cerveau et la santé mentale. La mission de la CBRS réunit une coalition large et diversifiée d'acteurs gouvernementaux, universitaires, privés, à but non lucratif, de financeurs de la recherche, de patients et d'autochtones. Ensemble, ils envisagent un avenir où le Canada sera le pionnier d'un puissant changement de paradigme vers une recherche collaborative, transdisciplinaire et ouverte sur le cerveau dans le monde entier. Merci. Thank you very much, Jenny. You can use the microphone.
Thank you so much. Bonjour. Veuillez m'excuser, je suis en train de parler français. So I will, for the sake of your ears and sanity, I will just give my talk in French. But thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited here to tell you about this national research strategy that we're building for brain and mental health, and also to tell you a little bit about how we got there and also what is the path forward. I would like this to be interactive. If, feel free to interrupt with questions. I'd like to keep things informal. So before I start, just so I have a better understanding of the audience, could I just maybe for a show of hands see, I want to say how many PIs are here versus trainees or research associates. So how many people here are PIs? Wonderful. And how many people are postdocs? And research staff or research associate? Oh, wonderful. And trainees? And I don't know if and I see children as well. Okay, well, so thank you all very much. And it's really wonderful to see such a broad representation of the entire science enterprise, all of you who play such an important role, because this is who we are building the strategy for. It's for all the different positions, for all the people at different stages. So I'll tell you a little bit about our strategy, and then I'll tell you about how we got there, and then what we're moving, how we're moving forward. So a little bit about advocacy. So first, we have in our advisory leadership, we have the heads of 40 neuroscience and mental health research institutes across the country, including URI. And we also have early career researcher leaders. We have an Indigenous knowledge holders group, and we have patient representatives. So these are our key stakeholders that are important in informing our strategy. Now, we are spread across the country, but we also have a wider coalition of all of these organizations that represent people with lived experience, Association of Neuroscientists, but also of the Neurological Sciences Federation, which is 7 different neurological specialties. We also have focused research networks and consortia in different areas. So for example, in dementia or in Parkinson, brain injury. And we have more than 30 funding organizations. So these are include, you can see in federal agencies, but also provincial level. There are nonprofits, there are private foundations, there are health charities. And some of these, for example, you'll see, is there a laser pointer here? Yes. So for example, Canadian Cancer Society, only 10% of their grants are in brain. But I'll tell you a little bit about our strategy and how we're able to bring all of these groups together and what we're trying to build. So basically, what we're trying to convince everyone, I feel like everybody in this room is already on this same page here, is that understanding the brain is crucial to Canada's success and well-being in the 21st century. And basically what we are doing with our strategy is to inform and inspire and guide the government to invest in a brain initiative for Canada. So as some of you may know, there are many other countries that have already invested in brain initiatives, and there are many who are on the way. We at the Canadian Brain Research Strategy, we have represented Canada on the international stage, for example, with the International Brain Initiative, but we've never had funding for our own brain initiative. Now, the thing is, we know our federal government is capable of investing in this manner. So here are some examples, recent examples of ecosystem building in targeted research areas like AI, quantum computing, and biomanufacturing. Now, this is of course a much smaller scale than the other brain initiatives of the world, but it's not insignificant. Although this smaller scale means that we do have to think strategically. So what we are doing is building a collective national strategy for government to invest in a major brain initiative. And at this point, I want to point out that we do not, if we get funding for a brain initiative, we do not want that funding. We do not want to become another funding agency. We are here to be an objective third party to make the strategy together. And that's part of the reason why we're able to bring so many folks together with us. The framework for our strategy came from early career researchers in brain and mental health across the country. This was 2 workshops held in the fall of 2020. I take 0 credit for this. And they got together to really think about what is Canada's strength and what is the future, how can we build the future of brain and mental health research in Canada. And this is how we realize that we have experts in so many different areas of brain and mental health research across the country. And the real strength is really how we approach research, which is in a collaborative, transdisciplinary, and open way. And I just had lunch with Uri, and he made it very abundantly clear that these 3 areas are strengths at this institution as well. And so the question is, how do we build on this strength in tangible ways? And so we arrived at 6 strategic priorities here in gray. And so these are concrete ways that we can advance to make a collaborative, transdisciplinary, open research ecosystem and to be able to maximize the impact of our current investments. So I won't go into each of these specific areas, but I understand that your institution just got a TOSI award, so congratulations on that. In building an open science ecosystem here. And I just heard about your strengths in transdisciplinary training, which is not just bridging across different scientific fields, but also to bring in social sciences and bring in ethicists, bring in people with lived experience and going outside of the traditional academic fields of neuroscience to really tackle this problem of understanding the brain together. So it is really important to our national strategy that we include and also integrate and engage the vast, distinct, and rich traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And indeed, this holistic approach that we are looking at and approaching the brain with is something that is, generally speaking, common in Indigenous cultures. And so it is an aspect, they are key stakeholders in our strategy, but they are also very much a key part of our strategy. And I can tell you about some of the work on this later. We are also, people with lived experience are another key stakeholder we brought together to make this strategy. And when we consulted with them, we similarly found that they were very much believed in the importance of these 6 strategic priorities, although in different ways. This was really unexpected because we weren't sure if they would understand what platform science is or would really grasp the significance of brain AI interface, for example. But so we were prepared not to have all 6 focus groups, but we did so. And you can read more about it through this link on our website. But the gist of this is that it's really important to us in how we build our strategy and also how we advocate, because unfortunately, our government is not going to listen to us if it's just the scientists speaking. And so being able to find a way to build up the entire ecosystem and to be able to do so in a way that can bring together all of these key stakeholders is a really important part of the strategy. So the next group that I'll tell you about are these funders and what we've been doing with them. So there are about 30 funding organizations, multiple branches of CIHR, health charities, private foundations. Some are doing research that is more driven by the community or in not just funding basic fundamental research, but also funding clinical research and implementation science, for example. So we asked them about their strategic priorities when we first held our roundtable, and we found that there was very strong alignment, again, with those 6 areas to concretely build a collaborative transdisciplinary open ecosystem. In retrospect, it shouldn't have been a surprise because this is why these areas are strengths in Canada. But basically, for example, in open science, we have 12 organizations that already have funding programs with open science requirements, and another 2 that had them planned, and another 3 that were interested to learn more. And this is out of 19 organizations that answered answered the survey in time this year. But then here's looking at the past trend. So from 2021, when we first held our first funders roundtable, to see, for just pointing out 2 areas I know are our strengths here in open science and platform science. And so you can see that consistent support for this kind of research. Now, this alignment across these priority areas is important because what we are trying to do is to build up the entire ecosystem. And so what we mean is, for example, even though these organizations have funding programs with open science requirements, not everybody has the resources to take part and to contribute and to adhere to these open science requirements. And so then not everyone can apply for these grants. And in the example of platforms, for example, we have a lot of organizations that can support research platforms, but how do you support their sustainability? How do you connect different platforms with each other? That should not be the responsibility of individual organizations because it's going to take away from their grants, and we don't want that. And this is something that we argue should be the responsibility of federal government to be able to create this network ecosystem, which is what they say they're trying to do with AI and quantum and all of that. So the other aspect that these data represent is an opportunity for everyone to work together. And so we've been bringing together all the funders in these focus meetings around the different priority areas and basically give them a space where they can exchange best practices and share their challenges and look at opportunities for them to work together. So I will just use the Indigenous initiatives one as an example that actually came out of the meeting on diversity in team science, was to hold a separate meeting on Indigenous initiatives on research and to figure out how they could work together better and to coordinate their efforts given the capacity challenges that were in a lot of Indigenous communities. And so in this meeting, some of the major discussion themes were capacity building, having Indigenous targeted funding programs, and also just sharing key considerations when you're carrying out research with Indigenous communities. But one of the moving out of this then is actually two-eyed seeing workshop, two-eyed seeing through compound eyes workshop, where we're really bringing everybody together. So the funders, all of the community people, the elders, also from Indigenous health organizations, all of those people that have taken part in our consultations with the funders and researchers, of course, in one workshop together so that we could tackle some of these problems now. So this is going to be held on January 18th. If you're interested, I should have put an email on here, sorry. Just email me at info@canadianbrain.ca. The email will be on other slides if you want more information on this event. But it's really just an idea. It's an example of how we are able to make advances now in building a collaborative transdisciplinary open ecosystem by using the funding that is already invested. And I kind of glossed over this part, so I'm going to go backwards. Again, informal presentation. Because there's currently $480 million being invested in grants right now for 1,500 grants. And we can start doing stuff with that investment to coordinate better, to improve the funding programs that are there. And so, and this is also where we can go to government and say, this is how much our community is investing already. You should at least match this. So, the Indigenous Initiatives Workshop is then hopefully going to lead to a pilot program. Andrew Manitowabi, who leads our Indigenous initiatives, actually lives and works in his community in Wickwinkum unceded territory. And so he's going to work with his community to try and pilot a research program that will have all of these funders involved, that will have all of the different stakeholders involved. So this is an example around our Indigenous initiatives, but it's an example of what we can do now with the funders around these 6 priority areas. So the first year or so was really around stakeholder consultations. And I know there were a lot of folks from UDM and other Montreal area universities. So we carried out a series of roundtables with researchers. All the graphs I showed you from people with lived experience came from our lived experience sessions. And when carrying out our Indigenous engagements, I showed you some data from our funders. So this was really trying to build this case for investment and asking everybody, you know, we need to make the case for why BRAIN, why Canada, and why now? Why is it so important? And also to guide what are the priority national level resources and activities that we need. And also to forecast, because this is the type of thing that speaks to government. It's like, what will the future look like if we're able to build this ecosystem? So what it comes down to is really our BRAIN initiative is asking for non-grant specific funding. And that's because our grants are much smaller in Canada. We do not have stable support for HQP, for trainees, for research staff. It is terrible how it's not really a viable career because you're dependent on all these grants. And you know, in the US, this happened. You know, my experience in the US is we have much larger grants and it's a different story. But by investing in the people and investing in the research infrastructure, to be able to connect the different centers, to build up training across the nation. So this is the type of non-specific grant funding that we are asking for, and it aligns with what government says they are investing in. And also, of course, everything that we heard from everybody. So for example, with the Pan-Canadian AI strategy in their first phase, they invested in talent and research. This, of course, was more being able to bring in specific to recruit different PIs and also to connect the 3 different research centers. In phase 2, they're working on standards as well, which is something that applies to us as well with the data sharing and the platforms and open science, and also commercialization. So actually one point I didn't touch on is that we're also bringing in industry partners on this as well. For example, there are several large longitudinal clinical trials that are being funded in an open science basis by large pharma in Canada specifically. For example, in Roche and Biogen, funding a multiple sclerosis longitudinal trial. So we're bringing in industry folks as well. The National Quantum Strategy, they wanted to build research, talent, and commercialization. For example, for their talent pillar, they use the NSERC Create grants, which is great. And I've heard many good things about the program, except there are only 3 grants for all the folks in quantum to apply for these 3 specific grants. And so there are elements that we can build on the programs that are out there already, but we need to make sure that this is something that will build up the entire ecosystem and not just be more grants for everybody to fight over, basically. So to kind of summarize, we're looking at building a national training, transdisciplinary training platform, so training new generations of scientists and HQP, and looking for and building on the programs that are out there, because not every research center needs every single program replicated, but being able to go to different centers to learn, and to be able to have that transdisciplinary approach. And of course, the second thing is collaborative research infrastructure. So something that can really eliminate or try and broach the geographic and institutional barriers, and then to really build on our existing researchers and resources with stable, predictable funding. And these are all themes. I'm not sure if the language I'm using is like kind of weird. It's kind of weird for me as a scientist. I had to learn this, but this is the language that government is using. So they understand what we need. We just have to kind of translate it to them so that they understand. This slide just kind of shows that, you know, for all of these brain initiatives that have already been funded, a lot of them also have data platforms. So this isn't something that we were just coming up with. I think everybody generally in the field of brain and mental health research is seeing you need to have more data to have those transdisciplinary collaborations. And so another aspect of why we are doing this is so that we can take part in these international efforts and, as we tell government, not get left behind. So this, just to kind of summarize everything I've said so far in this logic model, basically it was really important for us that we bring together all of these different stakeholders, because if we're going to build an effective ecosystem for brain and mental health research, we need to include all of the different stakeholders in building it so that they can take part and so that they can benefit from it. And basically what we've done is to convene people to discuss what we need. We agreed on these 6 starting strategic priorities, but also to activate them so that we can start making change now, regardless of whether government gets funding. And so we're putting together different publications and, of course, building up that overall strategy. And the idea is that if we do get funding for a brain initiative for Canada, then we will have that network in place. We will know what resources are out there, working through our leaders to know what it is that we need, and that this is something that we built together. So I'm going to pivot a little bit now, because so far I've just kind of told you about how we've got there and what our initiative is, and then I'm going to kind of talk about the path forward. Does anybody have any questions, or you save it for the end, or comments? Barry, do you prefer if I wait till the end, or? Because like what we're building is different.
I think what you guys are doing is really great. I think probably it's very clear your thoughts about it. But actually, it's really incredible. And I think one of the things, obviously, that I appreciate is putting all this effort together. It's really great. And also that you're planning includes not only PIs, but highly qualified personnel. That's something we're trying to do here in the center. It's to share skill sets. And it's unfortunately a group of people that are vital to science.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the vision.
Yeah, absolutely. The way we explain it to government is that, especially when I'm speaking with the elected officials, is to say you have the elected officials, which are kind of like the PIs, then you have all the bureaucrats, all of the policy advisors and the policy analysts, and the politicians know how important they are. and so it's just translating it for them so that they understand. And by being able to support research personnel and infrastructure, this is something that will really help across the entire ecosystem and address some of the inequities. It was something really important when I came on board that our scientific leaders expressed, and this came from even the people at the big centers that were getting all the grants. He said, we want to build out the whole ecosystem. I want to be able to collaborate with my colleagues, in the smaller centers more easily. So this was something that is really important. But it is outside the box, and that's why I really appreciate you all taking the time to be here, because the more people that understand it, the better. Because the traditional model was the cancer moonshot, for example, where US invests a lot of money, they just pick the best, quote unquote, best projects and people and invested in those things selectively, but it's not efficient, and it doesn't build, we have strengths that we can leverage. Okay, perfect. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move forward to talk about, what our last year has really focused on, which is more on outreach activities. And the gist of this is that you see the colored circles are all mixing together more, and we are outreaching more to government and also with international groups. And so, for example, this is part, I'll tell you a little bit about the advocacy and also just how we're working to raise the profile of brain research in government. So there's a standing committee for science and research, And this was elected unanimously across all members of parliament in 2020 and came into being in 2021. And so basically what they do is to carry out studies on certain topics related to science and research in Canada. They call in experts to testify, they write up a report, and they present it to the entire House of Commons. And this is how all of the MPs get to learn about many different things. And so they had a study on international moonshot programs, again, thinking about cancer. And they're like, what should the next moonshot be? What would it look like for Canada? And I was invited to testify, to give evidence. And so afterwards, I talked about the importance of brain research. I really kept to, we also had some of our scientific leaders present, like Joshua Bengio presented, and so did Guy Rouleau. And so they talked about the science, and I came to talk about the impact on Canadians, why creating jobs was important, et cetera. And we submitted a brief. But the cool thing about this exercise was that, and this was with 2 weeks notice before Christmas, we managed to get 15 organizations in our coalition submit briefs with us. So out of the 28 briefs in this study on moonshots, where some are on climate change and some are on green energy, 16 of them were on brain. And not only that, they highlighted why their area is so important. So for example, Heart and Stroke Foundation, they talked about, top message is we really need to understand the brain. It's a really pressing problem for Canada. And then they talk about stroke and why it's important, how many Canadians it impacts, et cetera. And then the bottom line is research is important, and this is why we need a national strategy. And so we got all of these organizations to talk about this. And so, it's not a competition, because most people in politics do not understand the breadth, and most general public, and thus the people in politics, do not understand the breadth of brain disorders, brain conditions that are out there. And that includes, neurological disorders, neurodevelopmental, but also brain injury, for example. I left out the slide, but and also addiction, intergenerational trauma. There's many different areas, and we need to highlight just how many people it impacts, so that they will understand why it's important to invest in science. And you all understand this is why you're in the field. It's about getting the people or the decision makers to understand. So out of that report, and again, this committee has members of all political parties. It was really fantastic to see that they really heard a lot of the things that we were asking for, because it's things that other folks were asking for too. So for example, to invest in people and skills, that we need a long-term research funding program that will provide stability and flexibility for projects. So this is non-grant specific funding. To support specific moonshot goals. And so ours is to understand the human brain. Open science came up a lot. They understand the need to build on research infrastructure. So this is all really great, because it shows that what we're trying to ask for, it does align with government priorities. And actually, I put this up because in Guy Rouleau's testimony, they actually quoted him in full in the report, which was, again, amazing. And he talked about how investing in people and infrastructure, and how having a collaborative ecosystem in Canada allowed him to recruit some big name person from Yale who had been offered 100 million euro to go to Germany, and came to Montreal, to McGill instead. And so there are ways that we can communicate this in government, and your stories do matter. Other things that we are doing is, this is a panel that we organized at the Canadian Science Policy Conference recently. So we had a health economist, we had one of the top venture capitalists in the country, and he also sat on the federal COVID committee, for example. We had the head of the Neurological Sciences Federation, so clinician scientists that represent 7 different specialties in neurology. We had the heads of 2 nonprofits, one in aging and one in neurodevelopmental disorders. And they were also significant, because right now federal government is running a giant competition called the Strategic Science Fund. And it's for third-party organizations that are funded by government to get money for their research funding programs. And both of them have a full proposal submitted, and the results aren't out yet. But they were on this panel together to still call for a unified and coordinated national strategy. And it's because right now, research is so low on the agenda of politicians, never mind brain research, that we all need to work together to raise our voice and get them to understand why investing in brain research is important, and on a variety of different levels, like for economic perspective, for innovation, and also for healthcare, and of course, research itself. But to bring that to the point and then give them a variety of ways to invest. So we have a national strategy. So if they want to continue investing in a focused way like they did in AI, then great. You should invest in brain next, and here's our strategy, and we made it with everybody. If they want to just put more money in the Strategic Science Fund, because there's 4 organizations that are in that competition that fund brain research, then that's also great. Do that, because they didn't say what the overall envelope was. If they want to, very low bar, just put more money into Tri-Council, we are also, we will take that, because funding for neuroscience and brain already gets the majority of funding in CIHR. And we all know that Tri-Council funding has just been way too low for way too long. So we do things like we put together a joint advocacy statement, and right now we're looking for place in media to put this out. And this is with the largest association of neuroscientists, and we brought on board the Neurologists Association, with Neurological Health Charities Canada, which represent patient groups, and with Brain Canada, which is one of the major funders of brain research. And they are also in the Strategic Science Fund. So again, it's working together to give this unified message. And we're also working with these groups such as Research Canada, U15, Universities Canada, Health Charities Coalition, because they are all advocating for more funding to tri-agency. And they just created a super group called, I think it's the Canadian Coalition for Research, so that they all align on what they're asking for. Because part of the criticism was like, well, do you want 2% increase? Do you want 20% increase? Do you want 200% increase? And so they all just kind of lined up what they said and put together a joint statement and formed a super group to advocate. On the international level, we've been working with groups like the European Brain Council to try and raise brain research to be a global policy issue. So this was an event I attended in Brussels, where we had the unit head of the Brain Health Unit and the World Health Organization and all of these other folks to really try and share our advocacy approaches to try and raise the profile of brain research globally. And so we also took part in a science summit, which are held, there's a series of science summits are always held around the UN General Assembly, because more and more, even at the level of UN and global health, are realizing that the solutions come from science. And so we took part in a summit on brain. And so there were 4 action items, or call to action, that came out of this. And, including to establish national brain strategies at every member state in the UN. And so we are actually also working with, and this is in collaboration with the Healthy Brains, Healthy Lives, CFRA, to build a Canadian declaration for brain health. So it's kind of taking our strategy, but putting it on a health policy level that politicians will understand. So right now, what we're really trying to do is to get everybody to raise our voice, whether it's individually or together as a group. And so, for example, with the informed advocacy and personal advocacy, really want you to know that your voice is important. Every single one of you, whether you're a senior PI and you're well established, and so you have that clout in your field, or you're just starting out, you represent the future, and some politicians want to hear from you as well. Or if you're a research staff, this is the type of job that government should want to create, these highly skilled technical positions. So there's different ways of telling your story, but all of your stories are important. And so we're trying to rally everybody all at the same time. So we're actually holding a advocacy training workshop. We've brought on board a government relations firm, Temple Scott Associates, to help us put this workshop together. But basically, you will learn about the government decision-making process, some of the communication strategies, how to engage a member of parliament, because every single one of you have the right to ask your MP where you live for a meeting, to send them letters. They have to listen to you because you're in their writing. And of course, we will give you the advocacy material. So there's usually, you know, a one-pager front and back that summarizes why brain is important on a, you know, a level that non-scientists can understand. And then also helping you work on letters. How do you explain your work in a way that non-scientists will understand? So this is a workshop. Please email me at info@canadianbrain.ca if you want to find out more information. So to summarize, this is a national strategy for brain and mental health that's brought to you by all of these different organizations. And we want to rally everyone around Brain Awareness Week. I don't know if your institution has plans, but just something to keep in mind. So we'll have that advocacy training workshop in January, and people can start sending out their letters. And then we were going to get all of these organizations in the way that we rallied around that science and research committee to put together a really big message from all of our institutions, from all of these funding organizations, health charities, patient groups, everyone, to just make a really loud, unified voice for Brain Awareness Week, so that everyone can understand that brain research is important. So in summary, we think it's time to give Canada the brain initiative it deserves. We have 40 neuroscience, mental health institute program directors, early career researcher and mid-career researcher leaders, Indigenous knowledge holders, patient representatives. We have stakeholders across sectors, including almost 50 organizations, patient organizations, funding organizations, health charities that provide services, industry. We carried out broad consultations to build this together. And so we have this blueprint for a national strategy, and we are now doing outreach for government engagement. So I guess my big message here is please join us, because your voice is important, and also because we're building this for you. So with that, I'll say thank you. This is my team, and Andrew Manitowabi, who leads our Indigenous initiatives, and Jonathan, our administrative coordinator. I should also put our emails on here, but you can just email me at info@canadianbrain.ca if you have any questions or if you want to join. Thank you so much.
Very much, Jenny. Let's start with a very simple question. It's about the two workshops, two wide, and the other one, the advocacy one. Where are they taking place?
Yeah, the two-eyed seeing workshop it's all virtual. It's going to be held on January 18th. And the advocacy one will be on January 19th. So if you email me at info@canadianbrain.ca, we will send out the information. We're just setting up like all the Zoom links and things like that right now.
Question?
Great talk. Thanks for coming. I had a question about, it's clear that clinical or applied research has a role in strategy. I just had a question about what the strategy was, maybe more basic or less applied research that really helps innovate and push the boundaries forward, but that sometimes gets excluded.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. That's a really great question, because I did not touch on this here. So a lot of the other brain initiatives around the world are just focused on basic fundamental research. And again, that's why I was so excited to visit here, knowing that you have that full range here at your center. And that's why we brought together so many different stakeholders. And it's an important part of the training element too, so that scientists aren't just working in their silos if they're a basic researcher, to be able to work and collaborate with clinicians, for clinician researchers to be supported, for scientists to know more about the commercialization process and how to form industry partnerships. It was something that really struck me when I came back from MIT, because I mean, the entrepreneurs, it's almost it's very much more in the culture. You know, so many of my friends, or you know, if they all have startups. Like everybody has startups, and in Canada we have this excellence in research. So I want to understand why we don't have that same culture here, because I know everybody is doing really good work. So how can we support this to happen? So you're absolutely right. Julie, it's about that whole span. It's taking it from basic to translational to clinical to commercialization.
Thank you very much. I think it's very stimulating to see how you can maybe have a unified voice to make changes in policies and of course money. I'm sure you're aware of the recent announcement that Canada would be partnering with the Horizon for Europe. Do you know if there's any planned specific investments for brain research or neuroscience in general?
Yes, it's interesting because like there's a lag between things getting finalized and getting announced. I didn't realize it was just announced recently. So there are for sure, for example, I don't know all of them, but for example, CIHR partners with Horizon. Some of the funding partners, like for example, when I was working at Brain Canada, I knew our money couldn't go internationally. It had to stay with Canadian researchers, but we can support the Canadian researchers that are in, you know, these large international collaborations. So even for funding organizations where their funds might be restricted to Canada, by having all of these partners together, you can find creative ways to be able to make that funding happen. And it is really important for us to take part in these international efforts, not just because the brain is so complex and this is how science works, but again, in pitching to government, it's, you know, they don't want to get left behind. We need to be a part of these things. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for your time, your precious lunch hour. Please email me at info@canadianbrain.ca.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your help.
Really amazing. I mean, this could be perceived as just, you know, one more layer, but you're actually advocating with and making sure you have a consultation among the partners, which is really, I mean, you have many organizations that are typically competing with each other. So that I think is really important to speak to the politics of the deciders to make sure that they have, because of course, if there's division, they will.
Oh yeah, they will just let us play.
It ruins our efforts if there's too much division.
Exactly, and I mean it's not like there is no competition. I mean,
no, of course,
but